The following San Francisco IGDA event was recorded on February 3rd at Dolby Labs in San Francisco. Our speaker is one of the Bay Area's most inspiring independent game developers. The critically acclaimed Braid established his position among the best in the industry. His success has led him to create The Witness, a highly ambitious 3D exploration puzzle game released on January 26, 2016, that has received unanimous critical acclaim. We invite you to enjoy a fireside chat with Jonathan Blow.
With any summary like that, it sounds like I typed in the whole game myself, which is not the case. There's been a bunch of people working on it, so I'm just leading the project, doing a lot of, in a small indie game company, you have to do like a million different roles in order to keep it going because you don't have a million different people to do all those things. So I do all that.
I knew I wouldn't have to ask you any questions.
There you go.
So, the first obvious thing is congratulations on the success.
Sure.
It must have been what was the run-up like to the launch?
Well, I still haven't had a day off, including weekends, since about December 10th.
Oh, wow.
So I will get a vacation soon. That's not that bad when you think about that it's been a 7-year project. So, a little bit of crunch at the end for me is fine. The company didn't mostly crunch. We had about a week and a half when the programmers worked on the weekend just to get the PC build sort of working, and the weekend before we were submitting to Sony for the console build. But compared to the game industry generally, we've had quite an easy time. The reason why I had so much to do is just because it's an art game, and inevitably I become the bottleneck on a lot of idea things. And, we had announced this release date, and I had 8 weeks to get a great deal of stuff done. Like voice acting and videos and all sorts of things. And it all got done, which was great. But, I'm saving up. My Christmas vacation and my New Year's vacations are banked, and I'm going to unbank them soon. I don't know what I will do with them.
How are you handling the kind of customer support after the launch? You were saying that there's a number of bugs.
Yeah, I mean, it depends very heavily on platform. Like on the PS4, we basically don't have to do anything because it's a fixed platform. You make sure your software works before you release it. You put it out there. Inevitably, there's a couple of things that you missed, and we did miss a couple of things, but they're really tiny, and they only affect a small number of people, and we put in workarounds. So there's like 1 or 2 things that'll ruin your save game, but we back up your save game every 100 puzzles or whatever, so most people don't lose that much. So there's almost no problem on PS4 at all, which is amazing given how complicated computers are today. PC is a completely different story, because you can't do that. You just don't. They're just, PCs are.
It's complicated.
It is complicated. They're not well put together. They're just a pile of random stuff usually, and the stuff doesn't work well with each other before you even put software on it. And then you put the software on it, and then you put really demanding software on it that's trying to render really complex scenes very quickly, and just things don't work. And so most of our support problems are on PCs, on very specific models of graphics cards with very specific driver revisions, including the current driver for some cards. And so we're just, but we're going all out. Like we do lots of stuff like, oh, you got hit by this problem, email me your save file and I'll fix it and mail it back to you. Like I've done that like 20 times, which is not, compared to the number of people who bought the game, which is, I don't even know current numbers, but let's say it's over 140,000, 150,000, something like that. Having to manually fix 20 people's save files is not that bad. That's a pretty good ratio. I wish I didn't have to do it at all. But then, graphics driver problems is my number one issue. If we didn't have graphics driver problems, I would have been able to take days off already. Yeah, maybe this weekend I'll take Sunday off. I actually kind of did. Like Sunday last week was like a half day.
How does it compare to the launch of Braid?
It's really not at all similar. So Braid was launching on a console, first of all. So that's a fixed platform. So it's very relatively easy launch, like last time. I mean, especially if you mean post-launch, right? So I was actually traveling. I was like at, I forget exactly which game conference. I was at a game conference in Brighton and just hanging out talking to people when the game launched. And I was sort of checked to make sure that something wasn't exploding. But even if there wasn't much I could do, right? Whereas here, we were like there at midnight when the game was going to start downloading on the PS4 and downloading and making sure it was on the store and all that stuff. And then I went to sleep for 6 hours and came back so I could push the button to launch the game on Steam at 9 a.m. And then, all that, just all hands on deck for a couple days to solve these kind of tech problems. Reception has been very different this time because people are expecting this to be a good game. Whereas with Braid, it was like an unknown thing. It was like, I was known among game developers, but I wasn't known among the general public. And so Braid was much more of a word of mouth thing where people started playing the game and then it caught on a little more as people told each other it was good. This time there was a little bit of that because I didn't want to spoil the game. So all the pre-release materials we put out were like, you're tracing a line maze, and I can't tell why that's interesting, right? Like all the videos are like that, and of course that's the reaction that people have is like, why would I do this for hundreds of puzzles? It doesn't make sense. And I had multiple options. One option was to spoil a lot of the game and tell people why it's interesting, and that option would fail anyway because the thing that makes this game magical is that it all happens internally. It's all the interesting things are inside your mind, and when I try to explain it to people, it doesn't work. So for example, I would go on press tours a couple years ago, or this year even, most recently, and instead of demoing the game to press, I just start it up, I let them start playing, I leave the room, and I come back 2 hours later, and then we have a conversation, or 1 hour if it's a shorter session. And the reason is because to know what the game is, they have to actually play it. Because the design is very, very subtle, it's the opposite of one of those story-based games that leads you from checkpoint to checkpoint and makes sure you succeed at every checkpoint, right? So because of that, there was a little bit of a question at the beginning, like, oh, what is this game going to be good? So we opened pre-orders, and we got a little bit of a bump at the beginning as like people who are really fans were like, yeah, I'm going to get the game early. And then kind of nothing for a while, but then reviews came out, and as soon as reviews came out and were good, then a ton of people started buying the game. So there was a big question about it, right? Whereas with Braid, reviews came out way before it was out, and still nobody knew about the game because there was no expectation for it. So it's a very different situation.
Yeah. Yeah, the reaction was definitely different, but there have been some polarizing or polarized views amongst consumers, and this time your reaction to that you haven't really kind of addressed it in the same way that you did last time.
I'm not as interested this time, honestly, because this game is by far the best thing that I've ever worked on. Like by far, like there's some things in Braid that are as good as some things in The Witness, but there's like in terms of game design, there's nothing in Braid that's as good as the best things in The Witness, and there's a lot more stuff in The Witness than there is in Braid. Like a lot. There's like The Witness is the size of like 8 or 9 braids, but they're 8 or 9 that are combined with each other, so it's more than a linear increase. So it's just an immensely more sophisticated game, and I know that. So if someone doesn't know that, what can I say about that, right? I mean, am I gonna limit what I do so that I make sure that everybody gets it, right? Do you dumb your game down? I don't think that's a good idea. So, if players don't get it, that's totally fine. I mean, you don't expect everyone in the world to like your thing. That's
right.
I mean, take some massively more popular thing like the Star Wars movie that just came out that everybody wants to love. A lot of people didn't like that movie, right? By a percentage of the population, it's maybe lower. I don't know, say 10%, 15% of people didn't like that movie. But that's a lot of people if you're on the internet looking for complaints, right? So, and that was certainly engineered to be much more of a mass market phenomenon than this weird art game that I made, right?
Yeah.
That I designed and that a team made. Now I'm slipping into saying that. It's not good. So now it's a little bit of a different thing when you talk about critics, because critics have a different job, right? Somebody who's just buying a game and wants to play it, just whatever, like they like the game, they don't like it, cool, right? It's just a thing in their life and they're free to do whatever. It's a little bit weirder when critics don't understand something, because it's their job to understand games, right? So if they play something and they just say like, oh, I didn't like it, but they don't seem to have that deep of a view of it, it's maybe not that good of a situation, right?
You're in the wrong job.
Yeah, but fortunately, actually, our critical reception is much more positive actually than I expected. We got a couple of lower reviews lately, but we got a lot of 10 out of 10s, which is great. You know, a lot of games don't get any 10 out of 10s, or not from notable sites. So it's been really nice that enough people get the game and what it's doing. And I've actually gotten some really nice letters from people, even like, you know, with Braid, I got a lot of letters from people who really like the game and like, oh, this is really cool and whatever. And a few people who say like, oh, this game changed my life and stuff. But, you know, sometimes you get one of those letters and I don't know. I don't want to go further down that line of thought. Anyway, with The Witness, I mean, I've gotten a lot more of that kind of letter, and they're a lot stronger. Like the game hit home for people a lot more because it is a more sophisticated thing, and so you really can't ask for more than that, right? Yeah. And that ability to really go and make something that really affects people, even if it's 1% of people, you know, if 130,000, 140,000 people bought the game so far, 1% is 1,400 people for whom this is a very, very, very strong experience. And then meanwhile, for everybody else, it's just a really good game, right? For a lot of them. Some people it sucks, right? You know, many people in life don't ever get the chance to do something like that, to work on something that means that much to that many people. 1,400 people is a lot of people. I mean, in this modern age, we're used to tossing around big numbers, but you know, and that's so far, right? As the game lives on, it'll have more people play. So it's a really great opportunity to be able to do that. And everybody in this room, or anyone in this room who makes games, has that opportunity. And I think we need to respect that and treat it very carefully, and not, for example, fall into this trap where you say, what do I do to get high Metacritic from the largest number of reviewers possible? Usually we don't think about it that directly, but you might think, oh, I mean, this happens all the time, where I come up with some idea for a design decision, and I say, okay, this is going to be great from a certain point of view. It's going to be a little bit hostile to people who don't get it, or a little bit, it's not going to make them feel good. And I know this thing will give me a lower review score, even by like 0.01 or whatever, and then you add 20 of those things, or 100 of those things, and now you're or you're 1 point lower, or whatever, right? Those thoughts show up, and if you're going to be an intrepid designer, I think you have to deal with them and make sure not to succumb to that temptation, because it's constant, right? Because as a designer, I think a lot of designers are this way. I'm not going to try to know how all designers are, but for me at least, I spend a lot of my time thinking about what goes through some imaginary player's head when they see this stuff in the game, right? They walk into this new location. What's going to catch their attention? what's maybe a red herring that we need to dial back because it's going to confuse them, right? What looks like it carries information relevant to what they're trying to do. What is a surprise? The witness deals a lot in surprise, and so surprises are very important, and not just the fact that there is a surprise, but the magnitude of the surprise and the precision of the surprise. How refined is it, right? How exactly at what angle does it come at you, right? Has there been a little bit of a foreshadowing of it, or a little bit of a misdirection of it in a way that harmonizes later? All sorts of things like that. And so when you're trying to see things from the player perspective like that, which becomes automatic when you've been doing it long enough, you don't even think about it, then right away you're going to want to put something in the game, and then you're like, oh, that's not fun. But it's cool and it's interesting, right? And I think it's good to have a little bit of resolve to do those things, as opposed to just sanding those off your game so that you have a smooth surface that doesn't upset anybody.
We had somebody submitted a question about the fact that this game was made, over such a long period of time, that does it become difficult to know whether or not to identify those situations because you're so familiar with it.
No, well, I don't know. I mean, I can't. The way it works for me is I just notice those things, and they pile up, and usually, especially toward the beginning or the middle of development. In the beginning, you're just building the initial version, and that's all really fun and cool. And you're building ideas at the pace that you can, and at some point, the number of action items that you need to do, like I need to fix the design of this and that, and I need to make a better puzzle here, and I have a vague idea for what should go here, but I don't know what yet. Like, I've tried a couple things and they're not good, but I'll come back to that later, because meanwhile, I need to program a different system for like people getting stuck in this area on collision or whatever. Like, so many things pile up eventually that, you're coming along at some pace, and here's the things that are piling up, and it goes and you catch up, and it goes and you catch up, and at some point it's just, wow, and you never catch up, right? Mm. Until maybe the end of development, when you get kind of close, and then you say, "I'll forget all the rest of that." Right? But for me, it doesn't ever go away. It's just the to-do list gets longer and longer, and harder to psychologically deal with, because you're getting buried under the number of things you need to do to make this game as good as it should be. Starts to seem insurmountable. So, what do? Well, you either cut the scope of the game and ship it, or you lower your standards, or you take 7 years, right? So we took 7 years. Hopefully next time it'll be faster. There's other reasons why we took 7 years. Like, we built a whole engine for it, and I did a lot of programming as well as a lot of game design. And if I'd stuck to game design primarily, it might have gone faster. So we're going to try and streamline it for next time. But that's what I said last time, so I don't know. We're going to do our best to go fast.
It seems like one of the benefits of having that, having release Braid and then have that much time, is that it appears that you haven't done much marketing to achieve the success that you've achieved. That a lot of that is based on kind of PR, essentially you, and
well, what do you mean by marketing? Do you mean buying ads?
Yeah, buying ads and like the traditional marketing stuff. Yeah,
we haven't really done any of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to do that stuff, honestly. And I thought about it, like about a week before launch, when I had time, I was like, should I buy a bunch of web ads? I don't know. And I feel like if you have a AAA budget, that makes sense. But if you don't, I don't see it as being that effective. And you run into ethical issues. Like, I don't like advertising usually.
Yeah.
Right? And so even if it makes some money, should I do it?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't, it's like it's just polluting the mental environment, right? And supporting this ecosystem of stuff that's all kind of icky.
Yeah.
Sorry, all you iOS app people, but I'm talking about all of that. I mean, I use ad blockers myself at this point on websites because the web is completely unusable now without an ad blocker. But that means that people don't make money off me going to their website. So I want the web to transition to something where I can put a nickel in the slot to read an article. You know, I would much rather have that than advertisements, because advertisements they're kind of invasive and kind of offensive. And the only reason we don't notice that is that we're accustomed to being bombarded all the time, every day. I mean, if you ever go off just out in the woods somewhere or to a silent place for a week and you're not bombarded by advertisements and you're not on the internet all day, and then you come back into the world, it's immediate how much noise there is and how much your thought process is interfered with by that stuff. It's not very healthy. So, and yet I considered it. So what does that say about me ethically? I don't know. But yeah, no, I have a good PR company helping me out, who usually do PR for much bigger games, and they've done a great job. So everything that we did for The Witness was basically, you know, me meeting with press and showing them the game, or just doing interviews on the phone or in person. Yeah.
Yeah. How much you attribute it's? I think it can be difficult to kind of look at yourself and look at your own personality, but you, I mean, you can see the effect. A week ago, I announced this event, and we're bursting at the seams, and just because of, I think, your name and your personality and who you are and how you express yourself in the industry. Do you sort of attribute that to the success of it?
Attribute what to what?
Like your you know, the sort of celebrity that you have.
I don't know. I don't feel like I have that much celebrity compared to a real celebrity. So I don't think about it that way, right? I just, you know, when I do interviews, I just try to be honest and I try to be interesting, right? Which is the opposite of what, you know, there's something called media training that you're supposed to get, which makes you the opposite of that, right? It makes you always dodge the question and redirect it toward the question that you actually want to answer. And it makes you not interact with the press like a human being. And there are upsides to that for sure. Like, there are times when in my opinion, very sleazy things have been done to me, where like I do an interview and then they take one small piece of that and pretend that I, you know, make it sound by changing the title and jimmying the quotes in the right way, make it sound as though I called a press conference to make some statement that's highly controversial, when in fact they took an aside out of a long thing. And yeah, and that's upsetting when that happens. And sometimes I blacklist specific reporters for doing that, and then I'll just never do an interview with that person or that outlet again. For the most part, though, especially lately, it works. I think the web, especially toward the middle or the end of Braid time, that kind of behavior on behalf of the press was a lot worse. Mm-hmm. I don't actually see them doing it as much now. I don't know why, but whatever. But yeah, I mean, I don't. It's like, why are you doing all this stuff, right? I didn't sit down and design this wacky puzzle game about drawing mazes in order to make money. Like, I would have made a Call of Duty clone, right? Or something, or a Minecraft clone now. But that's not why I do it, right? And so the whole media training thing, if you're cynically trying to squeeze the most money out of your plan for business domination, then that's probably maybe the right thing to do. But then maybe not, because I go and talk to people in a more human way, and it's actually appreciated, and it gets attention, right? Mm. And so there's always at least some value in being contrarian. If everybody's over there, then if you're over there, or even over there, you're going to get noticed. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, not very many people do that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Taylor Clark wrote this fantastic article in the Atlantic about you.
Some people don't like that article. Some people think it's overly positive. I don't know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So one
Anyway,
my favorite quote from that article is this: Blow's most striking feature is his eyes, which sit under a perpetually
that is not a very complimentary line that you're about to do.
half furrowed brow, and seem always to be evaluating, probing, assessing. His unchangingly flinty expression makes it extraordinarily difficult to gauge where Blow is on the spectrum between enjoying your company and despising everything you stand for.
Okay, that's not an overly positive part of the article, so that's good. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to make this discussion about personality or anything, really. I don't know where you're going with that, but I'd prefer to mostly talk about games and game design and that kind of thing, because, again, doing the whole celebrity thing is, like I said, it's not, there are real celebrities in the world, and I am not one of them, right? And so, I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
I guess what I wonder is that with the success of this game, you've proven to the world the kind of developer you are. No one can now say that the first game was a fluke. That you were.
No, I mean, if you flip a coin, it'll be heads twice 25% of the time, right? So you need to make, like, if you're a physicist, you need to get out to like 6 sigma before you have a proof. Okay. That's a lot of coin flips. Yeah. All right. If you're a social scientist right about now, yeah, you say okay.
I just wonder if it's something that you've really thought about, because maybe it is one of those things that kind of creeps up, behind you.
What exactly?
Well, that sort of status
but who cares, right? I mean, are you making interesting games or not, right? That's the real thing that you're putting into the world. Like, whatever, so that article that Taylor wrote was a big article. It got a lot of attention in the Atlantic, which is at least 3 or 4 years ago when it came out. It was a big print publication. Like, now print publications are even lesser than they were, I guess. I don't know about the Atlantic specifically, but whatever. It was cool, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people wish they could get that kind of attention. Nobody remembers that article today except for people specifically doing research on me. In 10 years, it doesn't matter. It's just it's a very ephemeral thing, right? When you make a game, you have a chance to make something much longer than that. And that's not to diss Taylor's work, by the way. I mean, it's a great guy. He writes really nice articles. Mm-hmm. It's just to say, I mean to come at it more from the direction of what are you hoping to get out of what you do, right? And that is, cool. Hey, I'm in a magazine article, but if you derive personal satisfaction from that, then you're inevitably going to be sad, because there will come a day when people don't write magazine articles about you anymore. And very often that day comes very quickly, approximately 2 weeks after they were writing magazine articles about you. Because that's about how long that you're hot, right? Like, think of some of the biggest stars. Like, Madonna doesn't get that much press coverage anymore, right? She was one of the biggest pop stars in the world, right? So pick anybody now, like Justin Bieber, amazingly famous. There will come a day when nobody talks about him. So I hope that he's deriving his personal satisfaction from a different direction, right? Yeah. I don't know him at all, so whatever. But so now if you make games that are really good and you really put your heart into them, and even if not everybody in the world understands why it's good, if you know it's good, then 30 years later, that thing is still in the world, hopefully, as long as you didn't put it only on AMD cards As long as you made it in a robust enough way that it can be carried into the future with maintenance and stuff, then that's a much better thing. That's a really, you've made at least a semi-permanent, semi-long-term contribution. So that's what I think about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think about how do I get more coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Even this past couple of weeks, right? You would think that you want to ramp up as big as possible and get the maximum amount of, and I haven't really done that. Like, I let the PR people pick the best things, and apart from that, I've been just shipping the game along with the rest of the team, because that's the most important. Making the game good is the most important.
Mm-hmm.
So I may have done fewer interviews than when Braid launched, actually.
Mm. How do you pick the platforms?
Well, very carefully. It varies depending on what time it is, right? So, and when we wanted to build this game, we also thought it was going to come out a lot sooner. So the original platforms were, maybe PlayStation 3 and PC. Well, we took long enough that didn't make sense. And the game was also, as we built it out, it became apparent it was going to be very hard to put it on a PlayStation 3 because it's a very limited machine. It was very fast for its time, but that time was a while ago. So, but PC was always assumed, I think, because that's what you develop on anyway, and because Steam's a pretty good place to get people to play games, and you can put it on your website. So it was always going to be PC plus something else, and we had good relationships with Sony. People there are nice, and they actually invited us to come to their secret meetings and tell us what the console was like before it was out. And I called Microsoft and I said, we've had our differences, but if you want a chance at having this game on your platform, we can't do all these platforms because we're a small team, so we're going to do one console initially, and it's either your competitor or you. So can you get us a dev kit, and can you get us into these meetings? And the response was, we don't care about indies right now, apparently. Like, there's no, like, the person I was talking to was nice, but it was just like, there's no pathway for an indie to get a dev kit at all right now. So it was like, well, we're going over there then, sorry, right? And then, and I actually sent that email again. I said, I know we had this talk before, but in a couple of weeks, something irreversible is going to happen. So I just want to give you guys another heads up. And it was the same answer, right? And so then 2 weeks later, we got invited into the Sony console launch, which is a very big deal in terms of promotion, right? I don't think an independent developer had ever been invited to a big thing like that before. And that was great. And I signed a little bit of limited console exclusivity to be in that, because they didn't want you to be on stage for Sony and then turn around 2 weeks later and say, actually, we're exclusive on Microsoft, right? That looks bad. So we just made an agreement that I wouldn't do that. And that was that. And then that's the two platforms that we shipped on. And now we're looking at new stuff, because hopefully, if we can get the graphics driver bugs sorted out, we will have plenty of time to do new things now.
Initially, when it launched, there was maybe you had a concern about piracy. Is that still a concern?
See, there are certain subjects where if you mention them at all, everybody just goes insane, right? I made like 2 tweets. I said, we're at the top of the pirate charts on one particular site. And I followed it up with a thing that was good-natured. I was like, I'm glad that people get to play the game. More people will play the game, but this doesn't help us make it, right? And then I made one other reply to that. That's all. It wasn't like angry, or it wasn't anything. But of course, news sites blow up on that because they know, A, that a lot of pirates read those sites and will argue in the comments about all the merits of piracy and stuff. And B, they just know that they get a lot of hits when they do that stuff, right? And so that's it, So the next thing I hear is like the next day, everybody's like, oh, I'm making a big stand on piracy and crusading and chasing down pirates and stuff. And it's like, no, I made a couple of comments like on a day when I did like 50 tweets,
Yeah.
Half of which were giving away free codes to the game. It didn't make any sense. So I don't think there's that much to say there. I mean, piracy is what it is. You kind of have to deal with it. I wish we lived in a world where it wasn't such a big problem, but the solutions are also really bad. Like, if you lock your game down with DRM that's nasty, you're inevitably going to make the game not work for people who actually bought it. And so then you start talking about acceptable losses, like how many actual people am I going to make the game not work for in order to prevent pirates from having it under some vague theory that maybe I'll sell more of my copies of my game to people who would have pirated, which nobody has good numbers for anyway, right? And I think there's an ethical issue there. As an engineer, I think that we should have some kind of code of ethics for computer scientists, and we don't. But what that code of ethics should say is something about respecting the time of the people who use your software and respecting their quality of life, which is absolutely not done in software almost ever right now. Especially understanding the branching factor of when you make something that's inconvenient or that people have to fiddle with to get working, and then you release that out to 1 million people. If it takes 20 minutes to get it working, you've wasted 20 million minutes of people's life, right? That is an ethical issue. If you could have avoided that by doing, let's say it took you 100 hours of work to fix that. That's way less than 20 million minutes. I don't know how many hours 20 million minutes is, right? It's hundreds of thousands of hours, right? Wait. Anyway, it's a lot of hours. It's more than a couple hundred hours. So that's an issue. And so then bringing that back to DRM, right? Software is terrible today already. If you try as hard as possible, like on PC, we tried as hard as we could to make the game work for as many people as possible. We ran it daily on a dozen or more machines in our office with different configurations for 7 years, and you release it into the world and it has all these problems, right? How many more problems is it okay to add? It already doesn't work, right? It's already a pile of garbage. So you've got to clean up the pile of garbage. You shouldn't be thinking about making more garbage, right? Especially intentionally making more garbage, which is what DRM is. DRM is putting more ways in for your thing to fail. That is what it is. That's what it's designed for. And that's a problem. On the other hand, we may end up in a world where if you don't do that, nobody will ever buy your thing, and then you can't ever build games anymore that aren't things that somebody does in their spare time, right? A thing, like I said, we had a rather big team working on The Witness. You know, there's 3D artists, there's architects, there's programmers, there's sound design people. There's just a lot of people. And if you can't bring all those people together for years to work on something in concert by paying them, then you can't make things of this scope. It just won't happen. You might still have games, but it's like, it's maybe whatever I could make in my spare time while I'm working a job at an advertising funded website or whatever, right? So if people like ambitious games, then we need to do something, maybe. Maybe not. Maybe we don't need to do anything. I don't want to be alarmist, right? Maybe it's fine. But it's just, it's complicated, and I don't know what the right answer is, actually.
I've no segue. So the one of the things I thought was interesting yesterday, I think it was yesterday, you posted this article on the website Fun Sales Facts.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting to go into so much detail about your sales and
Well, I was also being intentionally vague, though, so as not to...
Right. But I think still it was, I think people would have been fine with you never saying any of that. Do you what was the motivation for that?
There's a lot of motivations, and I'm going to be very honest about all of them, right? So one, it helps other independent developers because you just get more data about how games are doing and about how you could do under certain conditions, right? So before The Witness came out, I was looking at other games in vaguely the same category to help make a plan in my head about what was going to happen. Like, okay, there's, the Talos Principle is vaguely in the same category. It's a very different game, but, you walk around a 3D world, you solve puzzles. I was looking on Steam Spy to see who bought that and how many and stuff, right? So Soma, very different genre, but still felt related. So you try to look at that information, but you don't really have the information. So when a developer comes out and says that stuff, it's helpful, right? So that's thing number one. Thing number two is a lot of people just ask, like not other indie developers, but just people out in the world, right? And it's just good to give information. Thing number three, managing, what do you call it? Image management, right? So for example, I make these couple of piracy tweets, and now all of a sudden, because I said like, oh, piracy doesn't help us make the next game, now news sites are starting to report that maybe the game's in trouble, right? Like maybe this company is about to go out of business. So it's a way of reassuring people like, no, actually, we're fine, right? So you manage the news cycle that way. And then four, by the way, while you're managing the news cycle, you might as well get another press hit out of it for people who are interested in carrying that, right? If they're going to carry something crappy, like I made a tweet about piracy, they might as well also carry something with actual information in it, right? And that benefits the game a little bit because maybe some people think about the game at a time when they didn't, right? Or when they wouldn't have. It didn't help the game that much because if it would, you'd see the results in sales, and we don't. But, those are sort of all the main reasons.
So maybe another tweet about piracy or something.
Yeah. You got to ping pong it.
You talked a lot. You've mentioned a number of times working as part of a team, and the obvious question is how much then is this a collaboration, and how much did you have to kind of abandon elements of the design that or did you?
We didn't really abandon anything. I mean, to the extent that anything was abandoned, there's one thing that was straight out abandoned, and I don't want to say exactly what it is because it involves spoilers to the game broadly for anyone who hasn't played it, but there was one kind of puzzle that was abandoned for reasons of graphics technology because the version of the way you do this thing in computer graphics is wrong enough that it would have been wrong. It felt bad. But that's just a legit, straight-up design reason. That didn't have anything to do with team dynamics or anything. But the game is big enough that I just couldn't make it by myself realistically, right? Not just in terms of doing all the roles. Like, I don't know how to 3D model well. So if I did that, it would be a really ugly game all of a sudden. But also, it's just making the design parts of the game that I made, which was not even 100% of them, but most of them, was very tiring, and it's very hard. It's a very interconnected game where a lot of things come from a lot of different angles to meet a lot of other things, and I just wanted all those things to be right, and it's hard, and just thinking about to what degree, what is the fiction, and how foregrounded or how backgrounded is it, and do I really like version 7 of that I came up with last month, or am I doing version 8? It takes really a great deal of energy, and at some point I don't have any more to go into other creative parts of the game, like what should this location look like? I might have high-level ideas about what this location in the game looks like, but when it comes down to details, I don't exactly know, and I'm not only occupied with other stuff right now, but I'm not sure that I just have enough creativity in the time frame of this game to figure out what tree is that, right? But fortunately, there's plenty of other people on the team who will have ideas like that, right? A team full of people, hopefully, if people are having an enriching time in their career or whatever, people get to bring creativity to the project, right? They don't just sit down and you tell them do A, B, C, D, and E, and D had better be DA followed by DB or D1, D2, D3, right? If you micromanage people that much, you don't give them any room to be creative, and that's not very good. Not only because they won't enjoy themselves, but because you won't get the result in your game, right? So you need to let people be creative and bring their ideas in. That's how you get a game that's full, right? We have a game that was designed to be very minimal interactively, right? The world doesn't change that much. You don't have that many controls, and yet it's full of ideas. Part of that is the explicit design ideas, but part of it is all these subtle things that people brought in about what bush is this, right? And what color is this wall? That's a really important decision sometimes. And not just vaguely what color, but exactly, we're going in Photoshop and we're tweaking it to like the right value. That stuff really matters, you know? Or like how does this area sound? I didn't micromanage that hardly at all. The audio guys just did that stuff. We had a lot of high-level conversations, and then they filled in the blanks, right? So on a bigger project, you need to be able to do that. However, having said all of that, you can't just let people put stuff in the game that they want to put in the game. Because then, well, you can, but then you get a game that's like a lot of AAA games or whatever. I mean, which certainly you can do that. And it can be financially successful, but it'll feel like a jumble of stuff, right? It won't feel unified. So one of the things that people like about The Witness is it feels like a coherent, cohesive experience. And that is not easy either, but it comes from when these ideas pop up, both your own ideas as a designer, does this really fit with what we're doing? Which of these things fit better, and which can we sort of lop off and leave on the side? But then also, if somebody says this tree should be this color, you have to say, well, should it, or does that conflict with some idea about what the overall game is supposed to be? Does it harmonize with the rest of the idea or not? So part of my job is to say no to people when they have ideas, or say, well, okay, but it has to be different than that. It can be what you want to do, but it also has to fit with this other thing over here, right? And so then I do that 15 times in a row with people sometimes, and they get frustrated, but eventually we come up with something that fits in the game. Sometimes we never do, and it just doesn't go in, but usually we do. So, and then eventually, when it's all together, people on the team usually see how good it all is. And so the times that we're frustrating are usually in the past, or appreciated that we did all that work or whatever. But I think you have to do that beyond a certain size, or you just get a mess.
Do you need some more water?
I got a little trickle here. I need to take speaking lessons because I strain my voice too much when yeah.
We'll get you some water.
How are we for time? Do I want to be...
I don't know. We are happy to stay here as long as you want.
All right. People can leave when it gets boring. I won't be offended.
Leave when the battery in the fire dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, who knows, might be a second.
As you kind of go into the look sort of more towards the future, and thinking about your next project, and a lot of that is determined on the success of this project, right? And also what it was like working with that team and that experience. So have you started to kind of think about?
Oh yeah. No, I've got 3 next projects going simultaneously. One's on the side burner because, so there's one game, I actually talked about this at a speech in New York a little over a year ago, so it's not that much of a surprise. There's one game I have prototyped that's probably playable for about 40 hours. It's not a puzzle game. Some parts of it are very, very good. They're already Braid or Witness level good. Some parts of it are not figured out yet, so it doesn't cohere as a whole game yet. So that will get worked on later. It's not really being worked on now, because I want to do it in my new programming language when that gets ready. So So that's the other project, which is more like my side project that'll take up maybe some work time because I want to make it more of a serious thing. Thank you very much. Wow, this is a lot of I don't know if we'll be here that long. And then the other thing is probably the next game that we will release, which we're starting to talk about now. The whole team isn't on it, but we're starting to have discussions. Yeah.
Cool. You've been obviously very vocal about your criticisms of the traditional console gaming, or what has become of that. How do you feel the industry is now? Because I think since Braid, there's been a lot of really interesting things happening in the indie space. Obviously, a game like The Witness really shows how you can compete at a very high level. What are your thoughts about the state that the industry's in and what might happen?
I don't know. I mean, so I don't hang out in the industry very much. First of all, I don't. I have a small group of friends who are working on games that I like or that I'm interested in. They're generally designers, and I'm interested in the kinds of things they design. So I hang out with those handful of people. It's less than 10 people, and a lot of them don't even live here. So I go out of town to visit them. But I don't. I don't even go to the Game Developers Conference anymore. I don't really go to other game conferences. I don't. There's all these things, especially in the Bay Area, like, oh, let's all developers go have a beer, and I don't like to have beers.
All right.
And I don't
like an event
most
like one of
game
these.
developers. Well, I don't know. Does beer happen here after the thing?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so you've never seen me here, except a couple times, and it's because it's just, sorry, but it's true. I was more thinking of the ones that happen at the Thirsty Bear, if that's what it is. Because that's even worse, because at least here it's a quieter location where you could talk to people, whereas if you're in a bar that's loud already, then you have to yell at people, and I don't like that. You have to pretend you understand what they just said. So none of that is that fulfilling to me, right? Because I feel like most of the industry is interested in different things that I'm interested in. Like very high up, it's all about how do we exploit a franchise and make money off it or build a new franchise. And then lower down than that, if you work at EA or Ubisoft or anything like that, you're in service of that. No matter how much you try to not be as an individual, right? You can try to bring your own spark and creativity to it, but at some point somebody above you says, no, we need to maintain this franchise or whatever, right? And and so, in the mainstream industry, even the people who are trying to break new boundaries and be creative and be unconstrained always end up constrained and held back. And the mode of thinking becomes, we can do this very limited thing that's a little bit creative, which is cool. I mean, if you're in that situation, cool. Better than not doing that at all. Better than being just a total robot who just makes what some marketing droid says to make, right? However, I don't work very well in that kind of environment. I mean, the reason that I wanted to be independent is because I get really depressed in heavily corporate environments. It's my spirit does not flourish there, and so for the kinds of things I'm interested in, you need to be able to maneuver. You need to be able to do whatever you want. And the best discussions I have are with people who can do whatever they want, and who are making the most of that, which is not most of the industry. So it is what it is, and I don't think it's ever going to be different than that, right? Because there's a whole economy in the world, and there are things that work in that economy, and there are things that don't work so well, or things that are harder to do. And so you always, as a game designer, right, you design systems a lot of the time, or you design point-and-click adventure games, but usually you design systems. And part of the craft of being a game designer is about understanding what systems motivate, right? What kinds of behavior arise as a result of particular rules. And we have a particular set of rules in the world right now that create this emergent structure that's results in this large company behavior that I personally am not interested in participating in, but that is to be expected. So on the one hand, every time I say something like this, again, gaming journalism sites run away with it and like make it sound like I'm really angry at the mainstream or something. I'm not. It is to be expected that what we have is what we have. However, I don't like it that much, so I don't hang out in those circles, and I don't care that much. Like what's going to happen is our downloadable games going to get bigger on consoles. Maybe that'll be cool because independent people have more of an audience, but maybe not, right? Maybe as that space gets bigger, it'll get more taken up by bigger market players, which is what often happens in many markets. I don't know, and I can't predict, and I just try to make the best game that I can make right now. That usually takes enough years. We'll try to make it, take only a couple this time. But even 2 years from now, I don't know what anything looks like. So I can't make a game for a market. I can just make a game. And then when it's almost done, we see how we get people to buy it, and then we go. So it's more like it's not a premeditation, right? You have to sail a vessel through territory that is inherently unexplored.
You are involved in Indie Fund.
Yeah.
And so you are helping to support that. How do you think that may change in the future or develop for you in the future?
Well, I think what we're already seeing is we're in an environment where we don't need one specific fund like that anymore. When Indie Fund started, there wasn't even Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. So it was really a new thing. And part of what we were trying to do was make an environment where we pushed back on the onerous terms that publishers were offering developers. Because publishers were still used to this world where they were the gatekeeper and you couldn't get your thing on retail without them, and so they would take your IP and take everything that they could, right? And the deals were getting much like music industry deals, where bands just totally get kicked to the curb and whatever. Bad situation for artists, right? And then even in downloadable space, a little bit after games like Braid and whatever, people like Microsoft who figured Xbox Live Arcade is the place where your game needs to be, therefore we're going to put the thumb screws to you and give you the most heinous possible their contracts got so offensive in like 2009, 2010 that I felt like part of my job was to push back on them to try and prevent this dystopian anti-independent artist world from happening. And it got them very mad at me, and because I wasn't afraid to go to the public and say some things about what they were doing. So that hasn't happened. They eventually, probably mostly due to a hole that they dug themselves with how they decided to position themselves with the new console and stuff. That hasn't happened, right? So that's good. What was I talking about? I don't even know now. What was the question?
The Indie Fund?
Oh yeah. So it's just to say that during that whole evolution too, there have been a number of independent people with games that were very successful. So there's a lot of indies. Like you can walk around San Francisco and meet independent developers who have millions of dollars just like that they're not doing anything with. And they're cool people and they want to help other people get to where they are. So, we still exist as Indie Fund and we still fund stuff, but there's also just a lot of places to go. And that's great, right? Or you can do Kickstarter now, or you could do like Fig or Indiegogo and all that stuff. So that's good. That's all good. And I hope that we continue to have more choices that way, actually.
If you don't mind, maybe open the floor to some questions.
Sure.
That's all right. So, right.
So you were just saying maybe 7 years. Well, you didn't want to take that long.
Yeah.
But like, there's this idea in the startup world.
Are you going to say minimum viable product?
No. Well,
because I don't.
They say like it can take 7 years to really find your market, or it can take a long time to really. And Joel Spolsky, for example, had written a while back that it takes 10 years to make good software, and I happen to know, like, I was working at Maxis in 2000, and Will Wright demonstrated some of their early prototypes for Spore in 2000.
Yeah.
Right? So it takes a long time to come out with games. Do you think that, maybe your game really, even though you might have been able to come out with it earlier, like it was like maybe 7 years was appropriate?
Well, it was. I mean, for this particular game, right? So a lot of the time in the game industry, if you hear about a development cycle that went that long, it's usually because there was a big problem. Like, oh, the design didn't work and they had to reboot it, right? Or, it was costing too much money and they had to radically de-scope it, but then they cut the team, whatever. There's lots of ways that could happen. Usually games don't survive that, right? There's been a few games in the history of games that took 7 years or longer. Like even Rage was like 6 years. Battletech 2, which was the original canonical example, I think was like 4 or 5. I don't even know. Duke Nukem Forever was longer. That's about it. I don't know, right? So it's usually games that have a lot of problems. Spore, I guess, was really long. But for us, it was just for the limited number of people we had and amount of resources we had. You have kind of two choices. Say you have a certain budget level, right? If we go to two extremes, you can say, I'm going to staff up really big and make this thing fast with a lot of people, right? That works well if you're doing a very well-defined thing. Like if I'm making a Call of Duty clone, and I know exactly, if I can write the design document of what all the levels are and what all the weapons are and whatever, and I hire a bunch of people who have made that kind of game before, that tactic works, right? If you're doing something unknown that's unschedulable, that tactic is horrible because you're guaranteed to overrun your budget by a multiple probably, and you've got this giant team of very expensive people who don't know what the hell they're doing and whatever, right? So smaller teams are easier to maneuver, and you have less overhead because of the whole mythical man-month thing and all that, right? You have less friction. So for the amount of resources we had, a smaller team is better, and that means more time, but it also means you run a lower risk of failure. And it means that your design has more time to percolate and all this stuff. So the reason it took 7 years is because I kept seeing what we could do, and I was just like, okay, we can do this, let's go. Let's not de-scope the game because we're antsy and want it to come out. Let's build it up and make it the best thing it can be. And I'm thankful that people on the team all stuck with it. Like, it was only 7 years for me. I'm the only person who was on it that long, but a lot of the people were on it for 4, which is a long time for people to show up and work on something. So, and one person was on it for 6. So that's pretty serious, But yeah, it leads to quality work. I mean, you see a thing in another field, like you watch a movie like Jiro Dreams of Sushi, for people who have seen that. He would take a long time to make a game, and he would think you're a wimp if you felt like 7 years was a long time, right? He's serious. Maybe too serious, I don't know. But, there's, if you take game design or game development or, 3D modeling or programming as a discipline, as a thing that you're doing with your life that you want to do as well as possible, then certain things don't matter anymore, right? Like, so the 7 years doesn't matter that much because we did a lot of stuff. Like I said, Braid, it was a small game. We did like 7 or 8 Braid-sized things all put together. So what if they weren't released in sequence? like 7 or 8 things in 7 years of that quality level would have been amazing, right? And instead we saved it up and released it all at once. And that was great. I mean, it would have been psychologically easier if we hadn't done that, but it's just the way it came out. And I don't know. I forgot the original question now then, but there you go.
Yes.
I got a two-part for you. Maybe
Sure.
it'll be a little bit of fun. What's your least favorite game genre? And part two.
Match
If you
3.
were forced to make a game in that genre, what mechanic would you add to make it a little better?
Okay, so part A probably is match 3, or maybe even worse than that is the Final Fantasy VII style JRPG, where you have the guys on one side and then the monsters on the other side. I know a lot of people like those, but sorry, I don't like those. And part 2, it's hard because I don't think about games in terms of mechanics that much. There's been a really interesting arc in game design where people didn't used to think about mechanics at all. There was just like in the 80s and whatever, a few people thought that way, but most people were just like, oh, I'm doing cool games, right? And then eventually you got some thinkers at places like the Game Developers Conference and other things that decided to start specifying, look, here's the different parts of design, and mechanics is one of them, right? And that's good because it spread awareness that was a thing you could think about. But I don't, at this point, think about things in terms of mechanics really at all, because it becomes limiting. Because really you want to make a thing that's integrated. And there's no such thing like what color a tree is in The Witness is a game mechanic for several different reasons. Forget all the spoilery reasons that some of you may know about. Just like how much attention does it grab when you walk into a new area determines how that area is played and how well a puzzle that's completely unrelated to that tree might work, because people may have a prominent thing in the back of their mind or not while they're trying to do it. That's a game mechanic, but most people would tell you it's an aesthetic or something else. So at some point, those distinctions do not matter. At some level of refinement of the craft, they go away. All those lines just dissolve as if they were watercolor and you poured water on them, right? However, when you're learning, like if you're in school and someone's trying to get the concepts across to you, then maybe those things are very important, provided they're taught with the caveat that you'll go beyond these eventually, right? So to get back to the question, I don't even know. Like, I would look at a match 3 and just try and figure out what I would do. Like one example that I had, or one idea that I had for a match 3 was that you would be able to evolve the rules of the game until it becomes a completely different game in the end, right? But that's a very vague mission statement. I don't know if that would work because I haven't sat down to design it. So it's not like a good idea. It's not a tested good idea. It's just a starting point.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Oh, yes, you. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering how far into the development would you say that it, because you talked about it being growing in scope.
Yeah.
How far into development would you say that it kind of transitioned from about growing to about refinement of what was there? Because I mean, inevitably.
December 2011, or December 2012, depending on. Because so the game started I started working on it before Braid shipped, actually, a little bit. We started on it for real in like late 2009. So it took about 2 years to get a game together where we were like, okay, this is basically the game. And actually, summer 2011, we took it around to a bunch of press and stuff, and it looked terrible. Most of the people who made it look nice had not been hired at that time, right? They started getting hired in late 2011. So for a broad sense of that was when we kind of knew what the game was and could staff up. However, it took about another year, or I said late 2012, maybe even early 2013, to get the rest of the way to figure out the aesthetic elements and to refine the puzzles enough to fill out the spots. Because like as a first step, you might have like a skeleton that's like all these poles you put together. And then in the next year, you start filling out all the volumes around those poles so you have more of like a blobby pillow shape. And then that's your final shape, and then you're refining that shape. So, but the thing that happened in, like I said, Sony invited us to come be on stage. I think that was February 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And we had 2 weeks to make a trailer for that. So we were like, wow, we don't have any scenes in our game that will look good enough yet in a trailer, but we've done enough work that if we work hard for 2 weeks, we can figure that out. So that was sort of the last intense, all right, let's take all these sketches that we've done and all these weird things that we've tried and put them together into something that's going to go on a screen and not embarrass us in front of 1 million, 2 million, 3 million people on the internet when seen in conjunction with all these AAA things. So then after that, we knew what we were going to build, and then it was just, okay, we have to make the rest of the game look like that, which was a lot of work, and there were still a lot of unanswered questions because, like, okay, what do the interiors of buildings look like? Or we figured out these materials, what do these other materials look like in our style or whatever? They don't sound like big questions, but when you have to answer all of them and all of them well, it becomes a lot. But yeah, sometime around there. So half of development, at least, was spent after we knew what the game was. Probably.
A couple more questions?
Sure. Why not? I'm just talking. I'm just rambling.
So I think the storyline in both the Braid and the Witness are really thematic towards the gameplay elements. And when you mentioned the Witness as an art game, I think that is just as important as the gameplay elements. So I'm wondering what motivates like the lore or whatnot behind the decisions.
It's just different for every game, Like for Braid, the way the story was presented in that game and how it worked was part of the original, in the first 2 days, the original picture that I had for it. And then I spent all the time building that out. For The Witness, it was different because I had a picture of what the overall plot and goings-on and mystery behind the thing were. And I had an idea for how that was going to happen. Like, I knew exactly what was going to happen. And then a year later, I was like, oh, that's not very good. It doesn't put enough faith in the player. Because when I started doing it, it was at this time when, like, achievements were still really big, and mobile games that really string the player along were starting to happen, and I was being subliminally influenced by those. So I was like, okay, I need to have a reason why somebody would do all these puzzles, so I'm going to put a little story in a lockable box at the end, and when you do a row of puzzles, then you'll unlock that and you'll get to hear it. And then, so about a year after I had that idea, I was like, oh, that's really bad. Because if somebody won't play the puzzles by themselves, why are you making the game, right? And a lot of people make games that do have that kind of a thing, but it took a while for me to realize that I was being cowardly in the design and that I needed to address that to get the design to be what it should be, right? Now, it just so happened that had to do with story, but it could have been something else, right? It could have been, some aspect of game design involving difficulty or something. But it was story, so then I changed the story to participate in some other way. And that lasted for a while, but then I kept not liking it. And eventually, what I ended up with was something way, way, way pared back and in the background that I'm actually happy with. And it's just, that was what was right for this game. But it took me a lot of painful thinking about it and revisions to get there. For the next game, it'll be totally different. One of the games that we're talking about doing next is very story heavy. Like, it's built around the story, actually, which would be very different from either previous game. So who knows? I don't have a general answer. just make a good game and see what happens.
Okay, the last question. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned once that in Braid you saw someone completing a puzzle in an unexpected way. And I was wondering if you saw something like that happening in The Witness from the plays you saw.
I don't remember what that would have been offhand. I'm sure I said that, but I don't have a picture in my head of what puzzle it was right now. Just making it hard to answer.
Well, if you can say about The Witness, if you saw someone like solving a puzzle unexpectedly, or even like, oh, I didn't think they could open this door from that far away.
Yeah, that kind of thing happens sometimes, for sure. Sometimes it's a problem because the way The Witness works is it's about nonverbal communication, right? And I work very hard to make sure certain ideas get communicated through the puzzles. Early on in development, sometimes those ideas were not specific enough, and people would play them and be able to solve them, but have a different idea than I meant about what was there, right? And then they would take that to another part of the game, and they'd be like, but it doesn't work anymore. So that's a case in which it's a problem. But no, sometimes people just surprise you, and they come at something from a different angle, or, they're able to make mental leaps that are very kind of amazing, and come at something and just blaze through a section. And you're like, oh, I thought you would have had to go over there to learn this thing and then bring it back. And they're just like, nope, I just did this. Bam, right? The Witness is a little bit of a different game for that kind of thing, because usually when we talk about players doing stuff you didn't expect, it involves a system that has dynamics in it, right? Whereas The Witness is a very intentionally minimal system. Like, you can't jump. You could just sort of run and walk, and you don't even pick anything up, right? Whereas in a lot of games, like in Braid, people can do crazy stuff with, if you leave a ladder but then jump right on the right frame, you can like get a longer jump than you can other times, right? It's like a one frame glitch or stuff like that. In Spelunky, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. In The Witness, you can definitely do things. You can do skips like, oh, if I know how to do a certain thing, I can do it from far away and like skip half of this room and stuff. All that said, it's only been out for a week, so there hasn't even been that much time for people to develop crazy things yet, and I'm sure we'll see more, probably. I don't know. Is that it?
Yeah.
Am I cut off? No more rambling?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.